One of the major inspirations was Nicholas Carr's book, The Glass Cage, on our relationship to automated processes. And he makes the point that there are certain technologies that completely outboard human competency, like autopilot, and that all major airline disasters uh, over the last several decades, I mean, not all, but many, can be attributable to pilots acting in precisely the wrong way in a moment of crisis where the autopilot system does the wrong thing. And then the pilot has lost that tacit capacity to respond in crisis that is trained into them at the beginning of their.
It's an implicit response that they have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they've gotten soft basically. And it's, again, in Carr's book, he talks about there being another species of automation that he identifies in video games where you're dropped into an environment with no instruction manual and you have to figure it out as you go and you develop a competency in those spaces. So there's a cracking open, I think, that's really important here, which is an injection of humility into the stories that we're taking. And so there's where I see us as really having some hope amidst the transformations of this century are where we have found a balance between reasonable surety that we know how to act in the world with the flexibility and the adaptability to adjust the story upon which those strategies are based, thanks to the ability of our technological systems to expand beyond the registered variables. And so, like, to get back to the replicability crisis in science, like one of the things I remember years and years ago, Charles Eisenstein talking about this, I think in the Ascent of Humanity, is that there was a scientific experiment where they got very different results growing plants underground at different times, and they couldn't figure it out until they realized, because it wasn't the sun, they had controlled for the light. They realized it was the tidal influence of the moon.
Yeah, the moon has just as much of an influence, right?
Yeah,
And starlight, things of that nature, they've also seen in the national laboratories have had dramatic changes in growth. And some of the greatest growth yields can actually happen in the twilight hours.
right.
When at first we're like, the sun's required for the growth.
So it's this ability to see around the corner, like outside of the constraints of our models, outside of the variables we've selected, to see the externalities of our approach, to identify correlations in the semantic relationships that we have not yet managed to make legible in our systems, in our thinking. Like, basically, like, the greatest hope that I have for AI is that people lean into it not as a productivity enhancement tool, although obviously that's going to happen, but as an augment to human intuition and our ability to sense make before we try to concretize things
You're
in
right.
language.
You're absolutely right about this. And it's akin to the actions that happen with pilots and their tacit knowledge. We need to capture those elements of the tacit, the implicit, and put it into these systems so we can almost test ahead of time the structures and values of what's being said or the values that we're hoping for out of the actions we want to take. You can be productive in doing bad things, but the artificial intelligence should, if trained appropriately, given the right data, and brought in these elements of the human being that have those rich values, that have that self responsibility, and have that implicit multidimensional knowledge that goes into it, allows us to then form valuable communication with others and pre-test it before it goes out, right? Without, you could see how polarizing something may be, or even have the ability to map human behavior effectively, not in a linear instance that people go out, do this because they need to survive. It's all the other elements that truly lead to the decision making to occur in a system itself. And I think artificial intelligence, when given the right fuel, allows us to see all those different aspects of the mapping, like you were talking about before. It's not just that one dimensional thing. It can use with computation to show what hadn't been seen. And now, for us, if we can connect that layer of consciousness into the technology itself, all that implicit knowledge, that is the stuff that will make it robust. I think that's where the value systems start to come out. And it's not value that has been sought say by people who are trying to extract more resources, but value in understanding the interactions between ourselves that form from our communications, whether it be with others or us internally. But we need to map our internal communications first with that implicit knowledge into that system. Otherwise, the system really won't grow to the thing we really need to help us evolve. It'll just fall down the well of productivity like every other thing under the sun has done for us when it comes to technology. We really need to pull in the multi-dimensional aspect of our thought in decisioning to make that artificial intelligence become something that's more of an artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, and I'll add to that that I think, again, one of the biggest talking points for humans on the loop is something that grew out of my engagement with the Mozilla spinout, which is that the future of computing is not people exclusively or even primarily interacting with these enormous corporate language models, but that we have enough computing in the home that
Yeah.
people are training their own based on whatever data they consider salient,
Mhm.
and that decentralized curation allows people to run billions of parallel experiments that can connect with and feed into systems. Again, yesterday, we talked about this a little bit before the recording, but yesterday when I was talking with Andrea Ferris about what she hoped she would see more of in the world, she said that she wanted to promote the protocols for self-governance experiments that we can identify not just theoretically, but we can actually see working in the world, and then begin to try and make sense of how those successes can be generalized or transposed into other contexts. And so, like one of the things that I find really hopeful for the future of science and learning broadly is that right now, like again, you and I were just talking about telepathy research and how actually the protocols that people in this domain adopt are so incredibly rigorous, triple and quadruple blind, insane metastatistical analysis. They know that they're up against a thing so that they have to control so much more carefully than they might otherwise have to within a system where the hypotheses are sort of just
Yeah, because if
accepted.
there's any crack in the measurement or processy of them trying to show statistical validity of, say, telepathy, people will go to that rather than look to the value of just this thing being a possible thing.
Right. But the idea that these new technological systems can both help us distribute talent and funding to these weird marginal projects,
Mhm.
that we recover radical innovation in a number of different industries and sectors and domains, and that we can find new ways to measure the world and decide whether there's substance to those measurements. Like, I'll just put it out there in case anybody wants to see this succeed, talk to me. I lost some social capital at SFI talking to Melanie Mitchell and Allison Gopnik about this over lunch one day, that I see the claims made by complex systems research domains like the nonlinear dynamics of feeding networks, the fact that complexity science itself was not considered real science for a very long time because it gave bounded domains, like it gave constraints of emergent behavior rather than specific predictions, that it had a replicability issue because it was emergence is something that can only be discovered through simulation. Like you have to run the experiment rather than predict it. It's focused on understanding rather than the concrete specification of every variable. And I was like, well, there's a huge similarity between that and the kinds of claims that I'm hearing from the handful of people that I consider valid, serious professional astrologers who are saying that this is a tool, this is a hermeneutic instrument for understanding the world, that there are too many balls in play and that their relationships are non-computable,
Mhm.
but that we can understand it in a coarse-grained way, and that as we get down into more and more fine-grained resolution, we lose a little bit because if you look at political transits versus like it's like there's the butterfly effect of the stuff that falls below the threshold of your model.